Good morning and welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We are grateful that during this time of sheltering in place, we are able to bring our services to you online. With you, I miss the contact with friends and visitors and look forward to the day when we can all meet in this sanctuary without fear or concern for one another's health and safety. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, both physically and mentally. Keep your bodies strong and healthy to fight off any stray virus or germ, and keep your minds healthy to stave off loneliness and despair. If you need someone to talk to or correspond with, send me a message at minister@firstjefferson.org, and I will see that you have what you need. There are people that can do this. In the meantime, keep a gratitude journal to remind you of what you still have. I am so grateful to those of you who have worked to keep the church going with their generosity of time and talent and treasures. Let us begin our morning worship with music. Today is a gift. This moment right here is a gift, offering itself to us, ready for our response. It's not easy to receive a gift, it turns out. We want to fuss and feign resistance and say, "Oh, don't worry about me, I'm fine." Try to give something in return. "Oh, you shouldn't have." Try to earn our right for such an overwhelming thing to be thrust into our laps. Here, at least, let me do the cleanup. But no, this day is ours. You didn't earn it. I didn't earn it. We didn't make it. Yet here it is. This is how life is. And so we come together to say, wow, and thank you. And let's do what we can to have more of this life. For this hour, let us sing out in praise, granting ourselves silence, listening to the sound of our hearts beating, leading into the gift of life, listening to where it is calling us next. My friends, we have gathered. It is good. Let us pass this blessing on. Come, let us worship together. Our opening hymn is number 112, Do You Hear? song leader this morning is Dan Levine. Thank you, Dan, for that lovely song. We light our chalice this morning. Please join me in saying the words. We light this chalice to remember the light within, to know that the hunger we feel inside is not an emptiness, but the echo of an inner wisdom that already knows what we need. May our time together help us welcome that voice and each other back home. There. Please join me in saying the covenant we say each Sunday morning. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Our story for all ages this morning is Moon Over My House, and it's going to be told to us by our religious exploration person, Thomas Hausman.
Good morning, everyone. Today's story I'll be reading you is Moon Over My House, and we don't know who wrote it, so it's anonymous. Long ago and far away, in a small village that wasn't yet connected to the world by television or Wi-Fi, the people entertained each other with stories, songs, dances, and plays that they made up and acted out themselves. It was a friendly village, and people got along pretty well with one another. Oh, sure. Sometimes fathers thought their children were smarter or better looking than the rest. And sometimes mothers thought their homes were built more cleverly or stronger than the rest. And just sometimes, children thought they could jump higher or run faster or tell better stories than the rest. But nobody ever argued over such things. One day, however, a brother and sister, who were grown to adulthood but had no families of their own, decided they would like to be grand wizards of the village. Now, up to that day, the village had no grand wizards. They hadn't thought they needed any, but they were polite and listened to what the two had to say. As grand wizards, we would be the wisest people in the village, and we would be able to answer all your questions and solve all your problems. We would be able to determine the best time to plant seeds and the best time to harvest crops. We would lead all the dances and all the singing, and we would tell all the stories, and we would write the plays and show you how to act in them. But the people, they laughed a little. We don't have any questions or problems. We all know how to plant seeds and harvest crops. And we've been writing and singing and dancing since we were children. So we don't need your help. Thank you. And what makes you think you're so wise anyway? I so had my heart set on being a grand wizard, said the brother. So did I, his sister said. We'll have to think of something. And all night they sat in front of their house and thought. And the full moon rose in front of the house. And near to morning, it began to set at the rear of their house. That's it, said the sister. I think I know a way to make them believe that we're wise. For a month, the two planned a big party at their house. And on the night of the next full moon, everyone was invited. Now, since everyone liked parties, they all came. They sang and they danced and they told stories and put on plays, eating all the while. And when the moon rose, the sister said, "See how the full moon chooses to rise just in front of our house?" And as the night wore on, the brother said, "See how the full moon chooses to sail just over our roof?" And just before the party ended in the early morning hours, the sister pointed out, "See how the moon chooses to set just behind our house? We're under the protection of the moon because she knows we're the wisest people in the village." And that's how the village got its first grand wizards. And the grand wizards took over the singing and the telling of stories and the writing of plays. And they told everyone else what they should do, whether it was acting in the play or planting a garden. Soon, the people who had nothing creative to do with themselves began to argue about how smart their children were or how cleverly their houses were built. The children began to argue amongst themselves as well. And every month, there was another party at the Grand Wizard's house to prove the moon still thought them the smartest in the village. Until one month, when a child about your age was sick with a cold and stayed home from the moon party to rest. She couldn't sleep, so she wandered into her backyard, watching the night sky. Early the next morning, she heard the villagers returning and went out to meet them. "What a lovely night I had," she told the entire village. "The moon chose to rise just in front of our house tonight, and it sailed over our roof, and it chose to set in the back of our house." And the villagers thought, and they began to remember. It seemed the moon had chosen each of their houses for her path through the night sky. Well, the next month, nobody went to the full moon party. And instead, they stayed home and they watched the moon sail over each of their houses. And in the morning, they decided they didn't need any grand wizards. "We were all pretty silly for a while," they admitted. "But no, now we're all wise." And they all went to their own homes to write a story or a song or a play about how they were fooled into thinking the moon chose just that one house. And this story is one of those.
Okay, that was a test to see if you were listening. That wasn't Thomas Houseman, that was Thomas Earthman. And if you don't believe that, then I can say that my tongue got in the way of my eye teeth and I couldn't see what I was saying. But wasn't that an appropriate story? I mean, yesterday was the full moon, the first full moon of October. There'll be another one before the month is over, which means that's going to be a blue moon. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the month. Well, I've been starting every service recently by asking you 2 or 3 questions to contemplate, and then I give you my 2 or 3 responses and ask you to tell me yours. I'm going to do something different this morning. I'm going to wait until my responses have been told, and then I'm going to give you some questions to ponder. They may or may not be the questions I responded to, but I'll ask you to choose at least one of them to think about. You see, I'm not feeling like being a grand wizard today. I know you're smart enough to figure things out for yourself. Here's how it all came about, the service for this week. Deep listening is a topic from a study group we belong to called Soul Matters. Every month, the worship team, the small groups, and the children's exploration are given the same topic for discussion. That way, we're all thinking about the same things at the same time. Well, there is only one small group meeting at present, and the children haven't had Sunday school since March, so it's much been up to me. This month, however, we were given a choice of going in one of 2 directions. We could talk about self-talk, that kind of talk that leads you into deeper thinking about yourself, that uses tools like meditation and journal writing, therapy, or reading a self-help treatise. Or we could talk about listening more deeply to people who don't think or believe as we do, trying to see if we can come to some sort of understanding. Now, immediately I chose to take the path of self-talk. I could tell you about meditation because I took a course in transcendental meditation in 1993. And I could tell you the benefits of journal writing because I've been writing in a journal since I was a little girl. And I took a course in intensive journaling in 1976 from Dialogue House. And I could tell you how I got over my fear of telling my secrets to strangers because that's the way my family thought of therapy. I know the answers to all your questions, concerns, and fears. I am the Grand Wizard of Self-Talk. But when I sat down to write this service, I was bored to tears. This is the sermon I've given over and over, different title, different stories, different outcomes. It's my go-to service. become a smarter person, become a better person, become a more compassionate person, grow, change, be happy. I was even boring myself to death. I can't imagine what I was doing to you. You don't need a grand wizard. You simply need to have someone willing to pose difficult questions and take a crack at her own answers. You probably even have questions of your own. So this time I chose the second route, to talk about listening to people we don't agree with in the hope we can come together and heal the split that divides this country politically, socially, and spiritually. The only problem is, I haven't had much success in that area. Would it help if I share my failures? The first failure I can remember was as a teenage girl trying to talk some sense into my mother. She and I got along fine until she reached her middle 30s, and then she became muddle-headed, old-fashioned, dictatorial, and just plain annoying. How did I deal with that problem? By moving 750 miles away to Kansas City as soon as I was old enough. You know, I never did solve that one. But here's the thing. My own daughter turned out to be just like her grandmother when she turned 16. That same stubbornness, that same argumentativeness, that same annoying look she would give me when we disagreed. I decided it was the look that was the problem. That look that either said, I already know what you're thinking and I'm not listening, or I thought you were smarter than that. And when she gave me that look, she often said, don't look at me like that. So rude. So I solved that one by refusing to speak to her in the morning until I got to work and I could call her and talk without having to look at the look. And what did she do? She moved 3,000 miles away to Hawaii as soon as she was old enough. My daughter and I currently live just 1 mile apart, and we talk every day, except for the days when one of us is sulking over something the other one said that hurt our feelings. But we are working on it, and with some success. And more about that later. My sister's husband was my next failure. He thinks the Sabbath is on Saturday and that the world was created less than 6,000 years ago, among other things. We used to discuss these kinds of things. Well, discuss might be misleading. We used to shout at each other. We spoke loudly and listened softly, which is pretty much the same as not at all. Once he brought up a subject I disagreed with, and I decided I would be the grown-up, and I would listen to him without speaking. That's interesting, I told him after biting my tongue for many minutes. But let me tell you how I see it. Why would I listen to you, he asked. I already have the truth, and I just shared it with you. And he walked away. Well, we decided that since both of us love my sister, there were certain things we wouldn't talk with each other about. Husbands and wives, they don't always agree. But I did have one breakthrough here. You see, I was married to a Dane, a man born and raised in Denmark, coming to this country only after he was grown and his ideas and opinions were firmly in place. A man who was a teenager during World War II when the Nazis occupied his country. We were listening to the news one evening and the topic of gun control came up, and I quickly agreed with the commentator who said there ought to be more gun control, make it more difficult to buy them, make it impossible for some people, some guns. And my husband turned off the television set and said, let me tell you a story. And he told me how he belonged at 14 to an underground movement, how he learned to blow up places the German soldiers frequented using Molotov cocktails, how he didn't think he would live to the end of the war. And then he said, the first thing they did when they overran the country was to take away all our weapons, confiscate all our guns. We couldn't hunt for food even when food was in short supply. I vowed that if I ever got through the war, I would always have a gun, whether or not I ever used it. And then he showed me where he had hidden the pistol, which I didn't know he had had. I never quite looked at gun control the same way. I understood why he felt differently about it than I did. I listened. And what's more, I heard. Well, that's what I know about deep listening. More later on what I, still need to learn. But for now, let me give you my generosity report. It's time to get your donations in for the November auction, to be held online over 2 meetings a week apart. Look in this month's Courier, our newsletter, for a link to the auction donation pages. Our auction coordinator, Teeter Harmuth, is waiting for you to give your time and talent or precious pieces of art you have created. It's not too soon to begin thinking about gathering Christmas gifts. Dinners with friends are always big items for the auction. They may have to wait for a later date this year. I and some co-cooks still owe several people a dinner from last year's auction, but it will be the more precious for having to wait for it. This year, I'm donating a sermon topic of your choice, the privilege to have me talk about something that interests you, sometimes called Stump the Minister. Okay, my reading for today is by Marge Piercy, one of my favorite poems. She said, "We must sit down and reason together. We must sit down. Men standing want to hold forth, and they rain down upon faces lifted. We must sit down on the floor, on the earth, on stones and mats and blankets. There must be no front to the speaking, no platform, no rostrum, no stage or table. We will not crane to see who is speaking. Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings. In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest. In the dark, we could not see who speaks, and only the words would say what they say. Thus saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other into the dark, perhaps we could begin to listen. Perhaps we should talk in groups small enough for everyone to speak. Perhaps we should start by speaking softly. After each one speaks, she or he will repeat a ritual phrase. It is not I who speaks, but the wind. Wind blows through me. Long after me is the wind." So what does it sound like when you listen deeply? It sounds like someone is calling your name. Hush. Did you hear that? That's our next hymn, Hush. Listen, someone might be calling your name.
Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? Shall I do? Lord, somebody's calling my name. Sounds like freedom. Somebody's calling my name. Sounds like freedom. Somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? Shall I do? Sounds like justice. Somebody's calling my name. Sounds like justice. Somebody's calling my name. Somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do?
Thank you, Dan and Misha. Confession time. I have a bad habit of interrupting people when they're talking. Not always. When I don't, when I wait patiently, I prepare what I'm going to say when they stop. And sometimes I miss things they are saying. Now, I try to control this terrible tendency. You know what I mean. I'm not the only one who does this. There's a lot of literature about the need to listen to one another. There's a lot of caution about what will happen if we don't. We don't need that caution. It's already happening. So I try to listen to other news broadcasts, for instance, than the ones that give me the news I want to hear. Not that I want to hear good news all the time. No, I want to hear news stories about things that make me angry so I can go help fix them. But what happens when I change the channel and listen to a broadcast that has a different point of view, a different way of looking in the world? What happens is there's a gag reflex in my brain that gives me the same sort of feeling I get when someone like the dentist puts a finger in the back of my tongue. I choke. I pull away. Only the gag reflex is in my brain, and it makes me change the channel back to the real news. I think you know what I mean. I try to listen to both political conventions when they were choosing their nominees. I have to admit that I didn't listen to them in the same way or give as much time to the one as I did to the other. It's hard. It's very hard. It's much easier to listen to someone you agree with. Yet this is what the literature tells us. If we don't listen to one another, we aren't going to heal the pain between us. If we run away, move far away, nothing changes. If we agree to avoid painful topics, the hurt and the misunderstanding just goes underground. If we keep trying in spite of past failures, we get a little better, but it's still hard. It's painful work. If we stop long enough to hear, if we listen to the story behind the pain, we only begin to understand the other person. There is a lot of literature out there about the need to listen, about how to listen, about the wonderful outcomes if you learn to listen. I came across one story that literally made me cry. I thought of including it in this service, reading the whole story to you, but I realized I've already told you a similar story. Okay, I'll give you a brief synopsis. A woman, the author, vowed to listen at a political rally to people with a different point of view than hers. And she came upon a woman railing against women's choice to have children or not. The woman was almost hysterical, saying that they shouldn't have birth control, much less abortion. The author had to remind herself she had promised to listen even when it sounded crazy to her, who believed in choice. So she asked the woman how she came to this conclusion. And the woman began to cry. She had learned, she said, when she was just a teenager, that she could never have children because something was wrong with her body. She hoped the doctors were wrong. She and her husband tried and tried with no success. And here were these women throwing away what she wanted most in the world, a child to love. She might still sound crazy as she screams her denunciations to the crowd, but you begin to understand why she feels that way, and you begin to hear her story. That's the way I felt when my husband told me about his hidden gun. I still want more gun control, background checks, rules against certain kinds of weapons. But I no longer think that guns should only be used by soldiers and policemen, and if we took them away from them, we might all be better off. I know the story, one story anyway, about why gun control might be wrong. It makes a difference to the way I think about it. That's what the literature that I found most helpful tells us. We need to ask for one another's stories. We need to find out the reasons behind the opinions that differ from ours, because believe me, there are reasons. There have to be. Parker Palmer, noted author of books about becoming better human beings, about being a conduit for justice and equity, about varieties of religious and political thought, says, hearing each other's stories, which are often stories of heartbreak, can create an unexpected bond between those with opposing political views. When two people discover that parallel experiences led them to contrary conclusions, they are more likely to hold their differences respectfully, knowing that they have experienced similar forms of grief. The more you know about another person's story, the less possible it is to see that that person is your enemy. See, that's what I was missing when I argued with my mother, my daughter, my brother-in-law. I was missing respect. I sought to break the bond between us instead of healing it, to hold differences respectfully, not to change each other's minds. It gives new meaning to the words of Unitarian priest Francis David, we need not think alike to love alike. I have a third response, but let's take a moment to breathe, if you will, as we think about the communion of names and milestones that we talk about every Sunday. Brian Donahue was in the hospital last week with a leg infection. His wife tells us that he's back home now and getting better. I probably could not go on without mentioning our President Donald Trump, who is also in the hospital this week, and his wife Melania, both of whom were tested positive for COVID, along with many other people in our government. Whether you voted for Mr. Trump or not is not the story. It's that our government is suffering. The people in it are suffering, and we all need to hold them in our hearts as they heal or try to heal. Let us take a moment to consider the stories that live in this community, whether they are spoken aloud or just between friends or just held in our own hearts and heads. Let us take a moment to share the silence as we consider the healing that needs to take place between us all. Misha, can we have some healing music? In the Soul Matters literature for small groups, there is always a series of questions you might ask yourself, kind of homework to consider before you join the group. You are cautioned not to try to answer them all, but to meditate on the list and then pick one question that speaks to you most urgently. The goal is to figure out the question that is yours, the one that captures your inner voice, contains your work, asks for your story. This month there was another suggestion because I suppose we are often blind to our own needs when friends can see them clearly. In the book it said, often it helps to read the list to a friend or loved one and ask them which question they think is the question you need to wrestle with. Ooh, that'll make you think. I decided to give this list of questions at the end of my responses, to do with what you will. Choose the one that calls to you. Give them to a friend or family member, if you dare, a teenager of the same gender as you, and ask what they think your question is. Ready? I'll give them to you slowly if you want to jot them down. The question is, who listened to you when you most needed it? Or who first gave you the gift of deep listening? This question jogs some memories for me, the exquisite feeling of being heard. For me, it was a great aunt, the sister of my mother's mother. She was a woman ahead of her time, a bold pioneer, and I think she saw in me the daughter she never had. She was a great listener. The second question is, how has your listening needed to change as you've grown older? Needed to change is different from simply, how has your listening changed? Perhaps we need a change about now. Something to consider. Third question, have you forgiven yourself for failing to listen? Obviously, these are questions you will want to consider first in private. Parading our failures is not always an easy task. How about this one, number 4? Instead of arguing with them, what if next time you asked, will you tell me your story? I'd love to know how you came to this point of view. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Often difficult, but I think usually effective. Number 5, what if listening is actually an act of love? Oh, I don't think that question needs interpretation from me. It's a good question. Number 6, what gets in your way the most? The noise of the world, the noise of your worries, or the noise of your wounds? Oh, I could do a whole sermon on those trio of questions. Consider the noise of your own thinking as drowning out the sounds of your opponents. That sound possibly also drowns out the sound of your loved one or your compatriots. Oops, I think I just picked my question, didn't I? And finally, they say if we listen deeply to our own anger, we will discover fear or sadness underneath it. What is your anger trying to say to you? Anger, too, apparently has lots of sound and fury attached to it. No more questions. Taking the challenge is up to you. Attempting one or more answers is entirely up to you. Good luck and good learning. May deep listening come to you one day, and then you will deserve to rest from all the fret and fever of the day. Actually, that's our closing hymn, number 90 in the hymn book, From All the Fret and Fever of the Day.
From all the fret and fever of the day, let there be moments when we turn away, and deaf to all confusing outer din, intently
Looks like I got the first alternative in anyway, didn't it? The soundless wisdom of the deeper mind. That was what I might have talked about, but it's always there to think about. Let us extinguish the flame that has burned as part of our meeting. I've included the words so you can say the closing words with me as well. What is it about this flame that opens our ears, opens our hearts? Come back to your center, it calls. Return to that quiet space we all long for, and that longs for us. From this stillness, always a voice arises if we let it. So come, friends, let us listen once again. Let us find that flame inside that guides us back home. We extinguish this flame as we take it inside as our blueprint, our pilot, and our inner ear. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their words more seriously, and discovering their own true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which you invite strangers to become friends, to get to know their inner selves more fully, and even to dare to be silent with you. So may it be in all our lives.